A single spotlight glows over an empty stage, the kind where velvet curtains once framed harmonies that could stop a room cold. The wooden floor creaks softly, as if remembering the footsteps of 5 young men who fought for recognition long before the world ever learned their name. That lingering echo belongs to the Spinners, a group that rose from Detroit housing projects to shape one of the most elegant chapters in American soul. But how does a group with a 7-decade legacy, a catalog of timeless classics, and a sound that defined an era end up overlooked by the very machine that was supposed to elevate them? Tonight, we step back into the music, the struggle, and the brilliance that kept them alive through every era. Let me know where you're watching from, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Before the Spinners became a polished harmony machine that shaped the sound of the early 1970 decade, they were simply 5 young men in Detroit searching for a place where their voices could rise above the noise of daily life. Their story begins in 1954, inside the Herman Gardens housing projects, a sprawling community of brick buildings, children running between courtyards, and families trying to survive the economic harshness of post-war Detroit. Music wasn't just entertainment there, it was a lifeline, a release, a form of freedom. And for Billy Henderson, Henry Fambro, Purvis Jackson, C.P. Spencer, and James Edwards, it was the one thing that made sense in a world filled with uncertainty. The young men formed a group called the Domingos, a name that reflected their early doo-wop identity. They practiced in hallways where the echo improved their harmony, in stairwells where the acoustics turned their voices into something magical, and at night on street corners where neighbors gathered to listen. They weren't polished, they weren't connected, and they weren't thinking about fame. They simply wanted to create something together, something that belonged to them. Those early days were filled with small but meaningful steps. They performed at local talent shows, school events, and community gatherings. Every performance tightened their chemistry, every rejection toughened their skin. Every round of applause, even from a crowd of 20, showed them that they might be on the edge of something real. But the lineup didn't stay stable for long. Within a short period, Bobby Smith and George Dixon replaced James Edwards and C.P. Spencer. These early changes were part of a pattern that would follow the group for decades, members moving in and out, roles shifting constantly, yet the core identity surviving. After leaving the group temporarily, C.P. Spencer later found success with the Voice Masters and eventually the Originals, proving that the Detroit music scene was a tight community where talent could lift people into new chapters. Meanwhile, the foundation of the Spinners continued to solidify, one rehearsal and one performance at a time. A significant turning point came in 1961 when Harvey Fuqua, a respected producer and former lead singer of the Moonglows, discovered the group. Fuqua recognized raw talent wrapped in rough edges and believed he could shape it into something special. He signed them to his Tri-Fi label and renamed them the Detroit Spinners. For the first time, the group had professional support, real studio time, and a mentor who saw beyond their surroundings. Under Tri-Fi, the group released their first single, That's What Girls Are Made For, a record that introduced them to a broader audience and hinted at their potential for greater success. This was followed by Love, I'm So Glad I Found You, further establishing their presence. In 1963, Chico Edwards replaced George Dixon, adding a new texture to their vocal blend. The group was growing, evolving, and refining its identity, but the journey was far from easy. Tri-Fi was a small label facing financial challenges. Distribution was limited, marketing budgets were essentially non-existent, and the group had to push their music through sheer willpower. Still, these difficult years served as essential training. The Spinners learned discipline in the studio, professionalism on stage, and unity in the face of disappointment. Their bond strengthened, not because life was generous, but because they only had each other. By the mid-1960 decade, when Tri-Fi was absorbed by Motown, the Spinners had already endured more hardship than many groups experience in a lifetime. They had known rejection, instability, and the weight of being overshadowed by Detroit's dominant talent. But they had also developed resilience, patience, and an unwavering belief that their moment would eventually come. What they didn't know yet, what they couldn't possibly know, was that their greatest struggles were still ahead. Motown would not be the dream they hoped for. The road to recognition would twist in unexpected ways. And yet, those early years in Herman Gardens had already taught them the lesson that would carry them through every era. When your foundation is built on harmony, no obstacle can silence the music inside you. When the Detroit Spinners entered the Motown universe in the mid-1960 decade, they believed they were stepping into the promised land, a place where dreams became radio hits, where young musicians rose from ordinary neighborhoods to extraordinary fame. But the reality awaiting them inside Berry Gordy's empire was far more complicated. Motown was a machine, efficient and glamorous, but it was also overcrowded, competitive, and brutally selective about where it placed its energy. Upon joining the label, their name was shortened to The Spinners, a symbolic reset that hinted at the transformation Motown expected. But even with a new name, the group quickly discovered that being part of Motown did not mean being prioritized. The roster was overflowing with giants: the Temptations, the Four Tops, the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder. These groups were not just successful, they were cultural anchors. And in a company built on delivering hit after hit, resources flowed naturally toward those who already dominated the charts. The Spinners, despite their talent and drive, were placed near the bottom of the hierarchy. Instead of being paired with Motown's best producers or songwriters, they were assigned road managers and even shipping clerks to oversee their activities. The message was clear. They were a lower priority, expected to work quietly and wait patiently for opportunities that might never come. Yet even within this challenging environment, moments of light broke through. In 1964, the group traveled to New York to open for Marvin Gaye at the Apollo Theater. The energy that night was electric. The Apollo crowd, known for being both discerning and unforgiving, responded with enthusiasm to the group's polished harmonies and disciplined stage presence. Backstage, they felt a renewed sense of purpose, proof that when given a real stage, they could stand with the best. Motown noticed just enough to give them a chance. In 1966, the group released I'll Always Love You, their first notable charting single. The song climbed modestly, but the reaction from audiences showed the emotional resonance of their softer, smoother delivery. It wasn't the explosive Motown sound, but it had its own quiet power. For the Spinners, this was a spark, a sign that their voice could still break through despite the label's limited investment. But the spark did not grow into a flame. Between 1966 and 1967, they released multiple singles, and only Truly Yours managed to chart. At Motown, where anything short of a top 10 hit was often dismissed as failure, this put the group in a difficult position. They watched younger acts zoom past them. They watched producers decline to work with them. They watched themselves become background figures in a company built on household name. The frustration became overwhelming. They had the discipline, they had the talent, but they were stuck in a system that didn't know what to do with them. Still, they kept going. They toured, they rehearsed, they sang with a hunger that came from years of being overlooked. And quietly, away from the spotlight, they began to feel the early stirrings of a change that would redefine everything. By the late 1960 decade, one thing had become undeniable. Motown would never unlock their full potential. Their moment would not happen here. What they didn't know was that just beyond the horizon, a door was about to open, one that would lead them out of Detroit, into Philadelphia, and straight into the arms of a producer who would understand them in a way no one at Motown ever had. By the end of the 1960 decade, the Spinners had learned a difficult truth. No matter how talented they were, Motown was never going to give them the space they needed to grow. They were a respected act, admired by other musicians, but the label itself kept them in a corner too valuable to release, but not valuable enough to elevate. And then, in an unexpected twist, the voice that encouraged them to leave didn't come from a manager, an executive, or a producer. It came from Aretha Franklin. Aretha, who admired their harmony blend and believed they were being dramatically underused, urged them to finish their contract and walk away as soon as they could. It was bold advice, almost unthinkable at a time when Motown was the center of the universe for black artists. But it was honest. She saw something in them the label never did. As their contract neared its end, Motown made one last move. They paired the group with Stevie Wonder to begin working on a new project. On paper, this should have been the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Stevie's creativity, combined with the group's discipline, could have produced something remarkable, but the timing was wrong. The contract was set to expire, the sessions were rushed, and ultimately, the entire project was abandoned. It was yet another reminder that Motown saw them as an afterthought, an optional act, a low priority. When 1972 arrived, the Spinners finally left Motown. The departure was both liberating and terrifying. It felt like severing ties with the most powerful machine in black music, but also like stepping into the unknown with only their talent to guide them. However, not everyone could walk out the door. Lead vocalist G.C. Cameron, bound by his individual contract, was unable to join the rest of the group. Instead, Cameron suggested his cousin a charismatic, electrifying singer named Philippe Wynne. Wynne didn't just fill Cameron's spot. He transformed the group. His sharp, emotional, gospel-rooted voice added an intensity the group had never possessed, and his on-stage energy became the final ingredient they didn't know they were missing. With this new lineup, the Spinners signed with Atlantic Records, a label known for its respect for soul groups and its willingness to invest in vocal harmony. But the greatest blessing came when Atlantic paired them with legendary producer-arranger Tom Bell. Bell, already shaping the Philadelphia sound with artists like the Stylistics and the Delphonics, instantly understood the Spinners in a way no one at Motown ever had. He saw that their strength wasn't in explosive choreography or dramatic showmanship. It was in their subtlety, their warmth, their balance, and their ability to blend emotion with elegance. Under Bell's direction, the group's sound evolved into something lush and cinematic, strings that floated, rhythms that pulsed gently underneath, harmonies that wrapped around Wynne's soaring leads. Bell didn't just produce them, he sculpted them. He gave the Spinners a sonic identity worthy of their history and their talent. With Bell at the helm, the group finally stepped into the light they'd been chasing for nearly 20 years. The heartbreak of the Motown era, the years of neglect, the long nights wondering if anyone would ever recognize their worth. All of it faded as they approached what would become the most successful period of their entire career. They had waited a long time for their turning point. Now, at last, it had arrived. When the Spinners walked into the studio with Tom Bell for the first time, the air held a kind of quiet electricity, the sense that something long overdue was finally about to take shape. After nearly 2 decades of struggle, missed opportunities, and being overshadowed by Motown's megastars, the group was finally standing in front of a producer who heard them clearly, saw them fully, and understood exactly how to elevate their gifts. What unfolded next would become one of the most cherished chapters in American soul history. Their first album for Atlantic, simply titled Spinners, arrived in 1973 like a warm breeze moving through the music industry. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was precise, elegant, and emotionally rich in a way that listeners could feel instantly. The album climbed to number 14 on the Billboard 200 and reached number 1 on the R&B chart, eventually earning a gold certification. For a group that had spent years fighting for basic recognition, this was a moment of profound vindication. At the heart of the album were 3 songs that would become timeless staples. I'll Be Around, a track born from gentle guitar strokes, understated drums, and Philippe Wynne's tender lead became the group's breakthrough masterpiece. The song embraced vulnerability without fear, offering reassurance in a world filled with uncertainty. It made listeners feel held. It made them feel seen. Then came Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, a record bursting with warmth and optimism. The blend of Tom Bell's lush orchestration with the group's harmonies gave the song a sweetness that captured the early 1970 vibe perfectly. It wasn't just a hit. It became a soundtrack for new relationships, first dances, and memories that would last decades. And then there was One of a Kind, Love Affair, a track that showed the group's ability to navigate more complex emotional territory. Wynne delivered the lead with dramatic flair, while the rest of the group wrapped around him like a soft cushion of harmony. Together, these songs signaled that the Spinners had finally found their place not as a background act, not as an overlooked Motown footnote, but as leaders of a new, refined soul movement. As the group toured the country, crowds began to change. People no longer saw them as the underdogs from Detroit. They saw them as the new standard of romantic soul, a sound as sophisticated as it was accessible, as polished as it was heartfelt. Radio stations played them constantly. Critics praised the balance between Wynn's powerhouse vocals and the group's satin-smooth arrangements. Couples slow danced to their music at weddings, high school dances, and backyard cookouts. Their songs became woven into everyday American life. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just commercial success, it was a spiritual shift. For the first time, the Spinners felt aligned with each other, with their audience, and with the musical universe itself. They were no longer fighting to be heard. They had arrived, fully and unmistakably. And the best part? This golden era was only beginning. If the early Atlantic years marked the awakening of the Spinners, the mid-1970 decade became their coronation. What the Spinners achieved between 1973 and 1976 was more than a run of hits. It was one of the most concentrated bursts of artistic and commercial success any soul group had ever seen. For a group once considered underutilized, this era proved exactly what they had always known. They were built for greatness, and all they needed was the right environment to show it. Tom Bell continued to guide their sound with a master's touch. His arrangements became richer, his strings more luxurious, his rhythmic foundations tighter and more confident. And with Philippe Wynne at the helm, delivering leads that blended gospel fire with theatrical flair, the Spinners evolved into a force too compelling for the industry to ignore. Their next album, Mighty Love, arrived in 1974 with the quiet assurance of a group fully stepping into its destiny. It peaked at number 16 on the Billboard 200 and produced another wave of unforgettable songs, the most prominent being the soaring title track, Mighty Love. Wynn's emotional delivery, shifting from tender whisper to emotional cry, made the record a masterpiece of romantic storytelling. Crowds felt every syllable. Radio embraced it instantly. The Spinners were no longer rising, they were leading. But they didn't stop. That same year, the group released New and Improved, an album whose title perfectly captured their evolution. It reached number 9 on the Billboard 200 and showed a surprising versatility, balancing upbeat, infectious grooves with deeply sentimental ballads. Their vocals had never sounded more unified. Their confidence radiated through every note. The audience could feel it. Then came one of their most celebrated works, Pick of the Litter, released in 1975 and peaking at number 8 on the Billboard 200 and number 2 on the R&B album chart. This album produced two of the group's most culturally enduring hits. Games People Play, with its laid-back storytelling and conversational harmonies, became an anthem of everyday life, a song that spoke to the frustrations and humor of human nature. And They Just Can't Stop It, The Games People Play, became a signature performance piece in their live shows, uplifting audiences everywhere they performed. By now, the Spinners had achieved something rarely seen. They weren't just popular, they were trusted. Listeners bought their albums without hesitation. DJs added their new singles the moment they arrived. Critics praised their consistency. And beneath all the accolades, the group members could feel something even more meaningful: validation. In 1976, they released Happiness Is Being with the Spinners, reaching number 23 on the Billboard 200 and number 5 on the R&B chart. The highlight of this era was the explosive success of The Rubber Band Man, a song driven by playful rhythms, buoyant bass lines, and Wynn's wildly charismatic vocal acrobatics. It became one of their biggest pop hits and a cultural touchstone used in commercials, films, and television decades later. The song remains one of the most recognizable tracks of their entire catalog. During this time, their live performances transformed into must-see events. Wynn's stage presence was electric, unpredictable, dramatic, and magnetic. The rest of the group anchored him with a discipline shaped from years of struggle. Audiences never forgot it. They weren't just listening to harmonies, they were witnessing theater, emotion, and craftsmanship all woven into one. The Spinners were no longer fighting to survive. They were shaping a sound, leading a movement, defining an era. But success, especially at this scale, carries its own shadow. As the applause grew louder and the stages grew bigger, tension quietly began to build within the group. Creative opinions differed. Ambition clashed with stability. And the group's brightest star, The voice that had taken them into the stratosphere felt the pull of a different path. This golden era, glorious as it was not built to last forever. The cracks were forming, and soon, those cracks would change everything. At the height of their success, the Spinners seemed untouchable. Their records were climbing the charts with effortless grace, their tours were drawing sold-out crowds, and their harmonies were tighter than ever. But behind the polished veneer of gold albums and packed auditoriums, tension was quietly weaving its way into the fabric of the group. Fame had elevated them, but it had also magnified every small disagreement, every difference in perspective, and every unspoken frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface. Philip Wynne, the electrifying force who had taken the group's sound into the stratosphere, was both a blessing and a challenge. His voice carried the fire of a gospel preacher and the drama of a seasoned showman. On stage, he could command thousands with a single riff. Off stage, however, Wynne struggled with the pressure of being the centerpiece. The applause made him feel invincible, but it also widened the gap between him and the rest of the group, who had spent nearly 2 decades surviving by leaning on unity rather than individual stardom. As the group's profile grew, Wynne began to feel constrained by the structure of a harmony ensemble. He wanted more solos, more creative control, more recognition, not out of malice, but from the artistic hunger that had fueled him since childhood. To Wynne, this was his destiny unfolding. To the rest of the group, it felt like a shift in the delicate balance that had kept them together for so long. Meanwhile, internal disputes were becoming harder to ignore. Creative disagreements about arrangements, performance choices, business decisions, and touring schedules started to surface. Management added another layer of frustration. Some members felt unheard. Others felt overshadowed. Years of shared struggle had once bonded them, but the sudden weight of success pulled them in different directions. The turning point came during discussions about the group's next phase. Wynne, now a favorite on stage with fans and critics, began to see himself not as one part of the Spinners, but as the voice of the Spinners. That shift in perspective created quiet resentment among other members, especially those who had carried the group through 2 decades of hardship before Wynne ever stepped into the studio. Tom Bell, their producer and creative anchor, also felt the tension. He recognized Wynne's brilliance, but understood that harmony groups required balance, a shared spotlight, not a single dominant star. The conflict placed Bell in a painful position. He adored Wynne's voice, yet he knew the group's identity couldn't survive if one member took too much control. By the end of 1976, the strain had become impossible to ignore. Wynne was tired of compromise, tired of waiting his turn, tired of feeling boxed in by the structure of a vocal group. The Spinners were tired, too tired of navigating egos, tired of internal imbalance, tired of wondering whether their unity could survive the rising pressure. In January of 1977, Philip Wynne made the decision that would forever alter the trajectory of the group. He left the Spinners to pursue a solo career. For the rest of the group, the departure was both heartbreaking and inevitable. Wynne had been the spark behind some of their biggest hits. He had given their sound a dramatic edge that audiences loved. But his exit also felt like a release, a chance to return to the grounded, collective energy that had always defined their core. To replace Wynne, the Spinners turned to a familiar face, John Edwards, a seasoned vocalist with the ability to stabilize the group during the transition. His voice brought warmth, control, and a sense of steadiness. But even with a talented new lead, the dynamic would never be the same. The golden era was ending. The Spinners were about to enter a new chapter, one shaped not by rising stars or chart-topping hits, but by resilience, loss, and the long, winding road that comes after the spotlight begins to fade. When Philip Wynne walked away, the Spinners entered a period defined not by chart-topping success, but by endurance. For a group that had spent nearly 2 decades climbing toward the spotlight, the transition felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory, a stage lit not by bright marquee lights, but by the quiet glow of survival. With John Edwards stepping in as lead vocalist, the Spinners continued recording and performing. Edwards brought a steadier, smoother tone than Wynne's electrifying intensity. And while the group still delivered strong records, the industry around them had begun to change. The 970 decade was giving way to new genres, new tastes, and new stars. Disco was rising, funk was evolving, R&B was shifting into a new era. And though the Spinners had always been adaptable, time has a way of reshaping even the most beloved acts. Their albums after Wynn's departure charted respectably, but the unstoppable momentum they once enjoyed was gone. What remained was their reputation as one of the most reliable live acts in the country. For fans who grew up slow dancing to "Could It Be I'm Falling in Love?" or singing along to "I'll Be Around," seeing the Spinners live felt like stepping back into a cherished memory, a reminder of the soundtrack that had shaped their youth. And so, the Spinners leaned into touring. They performed at casinos, theaters, festivals, state fairs, cruises, and oldies circuits across the United States. Night after night, city after city, decade after decade, they kept the harmonies alive. Their professionalism never wavered, even when tastes changed, even when hit records stopped coming, even when the industry moved on. But the road took its toll. Throughout the 1980 decade and beyond, the Spinners faced the kind of losses that no group can truly prepare for. Early member C.P. Spencer passed from a heart attack on the 20th of October 2004. Billy Henderson, a founding member whose loyalty had anchored the group for decades, died on the 2nd of February 2007 due to complications from diabetes. Purvis Jackson, known for his unforgettable bass voice and presence, passed from cancer on the 18th of August 2008 while still performing with the group. Chico Edwards, one of the earliest contributors, passed on the 3rd of December 2011. Each death cut deeply. These weren't just bandmates, they were brothers, men who had built a life together through triumph and heartbreak, through applause and rejection. Their absence reshaped the group's center of gravity every time. And yet, the Spinners continued. Lineups shifted as new members stepped in to carry the torch. In February 2009, Jesse Robert Peck joined the group as a fresh addition to stabilize the vocal blend. Marvin Taylor replaced Harold Bonhart later that same year. Through every transition, the group upheld the most sacred promise they had made to each other back in the 1950 decade. The music must go on. The Spinners' later years became a story not of commercial achievement but of resilience. As musical trends evolved and younger acts dominated the charts, the Spinners embraced their role as legacy artists, cultural keepers, preserving a sound that defined an era. Fans who saw them live often described the experience as time travel. The harmonies were still warm, the choreography still smooth, the suits still sharp. Even without their original lineup, the spirit remained unmistakable. The most emotional moment came on the 7th of February 2024 when Henry Fambro, the last surviving original member, passed from natural causes at 85. His death symbolized the closing of the group's foundational chapter, the final link to those early nights spent singing in Detroit stairwells. But even as the original members left this world, their influence continued to echo through generations of listeners, musicians, and harmony groups across the globe. The Spinners had been tested by time, loss, industry shifts, and the weight of carrying a legacy across nearly 70 years. But through it all, they never stopped singing, never stopped performing, never stopped showing up for the people who loved them. Their decline wasn't a fall. It was a long, steady, graceful descent guided by loyalty, memory, and the music that refused to fade. In the long, winding story of American soul music, the Spinners hold a place that is both monumental and strangely understated. They were never the flashiest group, never the tabloid sensation, never the act that dominated headlines. But within the world of vocal harmony, within the quiet corners of radio stations, record shops, and living rooms across the country, their influence became impossible to ignore. To understand their American legacy is to understand how a group can change the shape of a genre without demanding the spotlight, how consistency can become a form of brilliance, and how sincerity can outlast trends. When the Spinners emerged with their Atlantic and Tom Bell-crafted sound, they entered a landscape that was already rich with heavy hitters. The Temptations had reinvented the male group model. The stylistics were floating in falsetto elegance. The OJs were bringing fire and grit. Yet the Spinners carved out a lane that felt distinctly their own, a place where orchestral sophistication met emotional clarity, where harmonies were warm rather than overpowering, and where every note felt intentional. American listeners responded because the music spoke directly to real life. Songs like "I'll Be Around" and "Could It Be I'm Falling in Love" didn't just top charts. They became part of the country's emotional vocabulary. You could hear them at barbecues, at reunions, drifting out of car windows on warm summer nights, or playing softly in the background of Sunday mornings. Their songs accompanied marriages, heartbreaks, new beginnings, and quiet moments. They became woven into the rhythm of American memory. Critics didn't always crown them the kings of the genre, but musicians and arrangers admired them deeply. The precision of their harmonies became a textbook example for vocal groups who followed. Their control, phrasing, and blend influenced acts far beyond soul, including R&B, quiet storm, contemporary gospel, and even vocal jazz ensembles. By the late 1970 decade, American radio had developed new programming like quiet storm shows, late-night soul blocks, and adult contemporary formats. The Spinners became staples of those playlists. DJs trusted them. Their records fit any mood. Their songs lasted long after fast-moving trends came and went. And then there is the cultural legacy, the example they set for perseverance. Few American groups endured so many lineup changes, so many industry shifts, so many internal and external challenges, yet they continued performing not for relevance but for devotion. They represented a work ethic, rooted in dignity, showing up, night after night, decade after decade, to give people music that reminded them of who they were. Their influence can also be heard in later harmony-centered groups like Boys II Men, who adopted the emotional sincerity and layered arrangements that the Spinners helped normalize. American choirs and vocal ensembles have studied their recordings for decades, analyzing the structure of their chords and their uncanny ability to balance multiple personalities into one unified sound. And after nearly 70 years, America finally acknowledged what fans had known all along. On the 3rd of May 2023, the Spinners were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a long-delayed but deeply deserved recognition. For many, it felt like closure. For others, a reminder that greatness is not always measured in headlines, but in the way a voice can settle into the soul. In the landscape of American music, the Spinners remain a steady light, quiet, warm, unwavering. Their legacy is not loud, but it is lasting, not fleeting, but foundational, a testament to the power of harmony in a world that constantly shifts out of tune. Although the Spinners were born in Detroit and shaped by American soul traditions, their music quietly made its way across oceans, continents, and cultures. Their harmonies carried a universal softness that transcended geography, and their emotional clarity spoke to listeners regardless of language. While some groups achieved global recognition through spectacle or aggressive marketing, the Spinners did it through something simpler, the timeless quality of their sound. One of their strongest international footholds emerged in the United Kingdom, where soul enthusiasts embraced them with a passion that often exceeded their reception at home. The Northern soul scene, known for its devotion to rare, heartfelt American records, welcomed the Spinners as if they were family. DJs in Wigan, Blackpool, Manchester, and London played their early tracks before their Atlantic breakthrough, introducing their music to a generation of British fans who revered American vocal harmony. When their major hits arrived in the early 1970 decade, they were already beloved in underground circles. In Japan, a country with deep respect for soul, jazz, and orchestral pop, the Spinners found another dedicated audience. Japanese collectors have long prized high-fidelity recordings, and Tom Bell's lush arrangements fit perfectly into that world. Audiophiles sought out vinyl pressings of Spinners, Mighty Love, and Pick of the Litter, handling them like museum pieces. Japanese labels reissued their albums with meticulous care, pristine remasters, lyric translations, and deluxe packaging. To many fans there, the Spinners represent not just a group, but an era, a sound that defined a golden moment in American soul. Their influence also reached Europe beyond the UK. In Germany, France, and the Netherlands, radio programs that specialized in classic R&B continued to play their hits decades after their peak. European harmony groups, especially in the 1980 and 1990 decades, studied the Spinners' vocal structures to shape their own arrangements. The Spinners didn't just travel across borders, they shaped the musical vocabulary of artists who never met them but felt connected through melody alone. In South Africa, their music resonated deeply in communities where American soul represented both escape and empowerment. Songs like "I'll Be Around" and "Could It Be I'm Falling in Love" became favorites among listeners who craved gentleness during difficult times. Their harmonies offered comfort, and their lyrics offered hope. And then there is global pop culture, where the Spinners continue to appear in places even younger fans don't fully recognize. The Rubber Band Man has been used in films, commercials, and television series worldwide, from comedy sequences to nostalgic throwback scenes. With every sync placement, new audiences encounter the Spinners for the first time, often searching for more of their music afterward. It is a subtle but powerful form of rediscovery. What makes the Spinners' global legacy unique is its organic nature. They did not rely on massive international tours or flashy campaigns. Instead, their music traveled quietly, finding homes in record shops, late-night radio shows, DJ collections, and family living rooms thousands of miles away. Their songs carried something universal: sincerity, warmth, and emotional generosity. Across oceans and generations, the Spinners remain a reminder that harmony is its own kind of language. It crosses borders, dissolves distance, and reaches places the artists themselves may never see. Their voices began in Detroit, but their echo belongs to the world. When you trace the long arc of the Spinners' journey from the stairwells of the Herman Gardens projects to the velvet stages of theaters across the world, you find a story shaped not by luck nor by industry favoritism, but by resilience. Their legacy was never built on spectacle. It was built on craftsmanship, on brotherhood, on the quiet, steady belief that harmonies can heal even the most fragile parts of the human heart. The Spinners lived through every phase a group can endure: the hunger of early dreams, the heartbreak of being overlooked, the explosive joy of finally finding the right producer, and the inevitable descent into loss and transition. Yet through each turn, they carried themselves with dignity. They showed what it means to keep showing up even when the world stops watching. Their golden era with Tom Bell produced songs that now feel like part of America's emotional DNA. "I'll Be Around," "Could It Be I'm Falling in Love," "Mighty Love," "One of a Kind," "Love Affair," and "Games People Play" are not just classics, they are living memories. They remain present at weddings, anniversaries, family gatherings, and quiet late-night drives. Their music has offered comfort through grief, encouragement through heartbreak, and joy through celebration. Not many groups achieve that kind of intimacy with the public, but their deeper legacy lies in the way they endured. After losing Philippe Wynne, after watching audiences shift to new genres, after surviving lineup changes and tragedies that would shatter many groups, the Spinners continued to sing. Even as the industry changed, even as fame drifted away, they maintained the heart of what they always were: a harmony group built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to the craft. The passing of Henry Fambro in February 2024 marked the end of the original lineage, but it did not mark the end of the Spinners. The music remains. The influence remains. The generations of fans from Detroit to London, Johannesburg to Tokyo remain. Their songs are still passed down from parents to children, rediscovered by young listeners who realize that what the Spinners created is timeless. And perhaps that is the most moving part of their legacy. They never chased immortality, but they found it anyway. As you reflect on their journey, consider what their story represents. It is a reminder that greatness is not always loud, that brilliance is not always recognized immediately, that the road to legacy is sometimes long, winding, and paved with setbacks. But when artists stay true to themselves, truly committed to their sound, their values, and their audience, their work finds a way to last. If you have ever danced to their music, cried to their lyrics, or felt comfort in their harmonies, then you are part of that legacy too. The Spinners belong to everyone who has ever needed a voice that feels like home. Before you go, I would love to hear from you. What is your favorite Spinners song? Which era of their music lives closest to your heart? And if you believe, as I do, that legends deserve their flowers while we can still give them, then please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling the stories of artists who shaped our world, even when history tried to overlook them. This has been the story of the Spinners, a group that never stopped singing, never stopped giving, and never stopped reminding us what harmony truly sounds like.